Can't believe that we're talking on July 20th already. This year is going by so fast, and hasn't been an easy year, has it? But we're going to get started in just a few minutes. As usual, we've got all of our technological rigmarole that we have to go through in order to get everything how it's supposed to be. But again, thanks so much for taking an hour out of your evening to hang out with us and continue our conversation that we've been calling the messy middle, where it's just some friends sitting down and talking about something that's very near and dear to our hearts, and I think near and dear to yours as well. Otherwise, you're probably not coming back every week for this. And that's just race, not just in our world or in our country, but in our own backyards, in our neighborhoods. And how do we think through it and understand it differently? And I think tonight's going to be eye-opening as Jarrell just has a chance to share some more stories, and Diane and I can interact with him along those lines. And I think what our goal has been is to model for you what friendship looks like. Not that you don't know what friendship looks like, but around this issue in particular, and open dialogue and a lot of question asking and eye-opening moments where you go, wow, I didn't know it was like that from your seat, from your perspective. And so hopefully this has been a real helpful thing for you. So welcome if you're with us here on Zoom, or if you are watching the live feed over to Facebook. Thanks so much for being with us. I believe that we are recording, so that means we are good to go. Is that right, Jerome?
We're good to go.
All right. So just kind of as a review, the first week and really the second week, we just heard from Jarrell directly from his heart, his own experience, some stories from his family as a dad, from his family as a child. And last week we spent a lot of time talking through the things that make you go, And I know that for me, that was a real convicting hour of really wrestling through some of the things that I've heard my whole life and maybe even thought my whole life, and gave me the chance to kind of reconsider and reorganize my thinking there. So today we're going to jump in, and I'm going to come back at the end with just some thoughts on what does it mean to navigate this as a follower of Jesus. We kicked off this discussion way back on July 5th on a Sunday, and I kind of shared those thoughts, and I just want to review them briefly. Because that's really what's driving this for us. That's really the heart behind this, is we want to honor Jesus with what we believe his wishes are for our world and for our nation and for our families and neighborhoods. So with that, Jarrell, I will just kind of kick it off. You had said before we jumped on, you were going to share some stories today that actually have come from some white friends, not just your Black friends, and also some of the ways that you navigate life differently because of your experience and all of that. So I'll let you kick us off wherever you want to kick us off at.
Okay. Well, I think one of the most difficult things to do is to try to help people understand some of the things that I do that, may seem peculiar, or that other Black people do that seem odd, or that you don't tend to think about when you go about your day. And then also to kind of share the how do you get to that point? If it feels like a little sense of crazy, I guess. It's not something that sits in the forefront of your mind, but I guess it's kind of the way you learn to navigate, life essentially. Right before we were on, we were talking about New York, and Diane is from New York. And, you think about if you go to New York and you're in downtown New York and you're a New Yorker, right? You learn how to navigate the streets of New York, crossing streets and talking to people, and how do you engage them, and so on and so forth. And for someone who's probably not from there, it might seem, quite difficult to navigate the streets of New York, so to speak. But at some point you kind of get used to it, and you figure out how to navigate that. So you don't necessarily think about it consciously, but you're still in the back of your mind as you're walking and talking with a friend or so on and so forth. You know how to navigate the streets essentially. And I think that's probably the best analogy I could give with regard to the thoughts that I have. Um, and sometimes they're very conscious, and sometimes they're subconscious. And I'll start with some simple things, and I've mentioned them before. I think I may have mentioned them on our very first talk when we did on Instagram. How I do things like I think about what I'm wearing when I go out in public, because I want to be perceived as someone that's trustworthy, or someone that you don't need to feel threatened by. Or when I walk through the neighborhood, I'm conscious of that I'm walking through a white neighborhood. And you might think, well, but again, we're not in those times of the 60s and so on and so forth. So for that reason, why are you concerned about these things? And the reason I'm concerned about them are for all the reasons and the stories that I've shared with my personal experiences. And those are that's just the tip of the iceberg when I think about those stories. But then I also think about the stories of my Black friends who share the exact same type of experiences, with they're either their kids, being treated unfairly, or denied something, or spoken to them in a way that's directly related to their being Black. And then there's all the other ones, the other experiences where you're not sure because it felt like something wasn't right, but was it that the person was a jerk, or was it something else? And so you have to navigate that as well. I mentioned.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Mhm.
Can we give like a real quick example? Because I think you and I have talked about this before.
Mhm.
When you're thinking about getting dressed,
Right.
and one of the things that, because I think, I would say there are times where I think about what I'm going to wear from the
Mhm.
perspective of I want to be trusted or whatever. But
Right.
you said I don't want to come across as threatening.
Right.
And like the first thing that came to my mind is a hoodie.
Right.
Right. Like I could put on a hoodie and it does not cross my mind that I'm going to come across as threatening. But for you, that's a different story. Am I right on that?
That would be a perfect example. So like when we have a Newfie Shepherd mix, so it's about 100-pound dog, and when Jarrell takes him for a walk, he knows this is the way you need to walk. Be conscious of your surroundings. Don't wear your hoodie. Especially because he loves hoodies, so he wears them year round, and even when it's not cold outside, he'll tend to wear them. And so, like, hey, make sure your face is clear. When you see people, speak to them. And some of these things are things you'd want to do anyway. But for me, they're coming from a different place. They're not coming from a place of just be respectful for the sake of being respectful and it's the right thing to do. But it's also because someone may perceive you differently. And what I don't want them to do is respond to you in a way that, they think, you're threatening or something like that. Kind of like your story from last week when the kids are walking across the street, right?
Yeah.
And so those are the things that kind of sit in my mind as I try to navigate stuff.
And that's part of white privilege, right? That I don't have to think about that. I
Right,
don't have I don't have to think twice about putting on a hoodie.
right. And I think, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think one of the things to understand is this is, that that term invokes something in people sometimes. And I don't have a problem with the fact that you don't have to worry about some of the things that I worry about. I'm not mad with you about it. I don't think you should feel guilty because you don't have to navigate these things. This is the times that we live in, and they're the result of our history and our circumstances. But it's not a bad thing. We all have different privileges. So I think it's really important to understand that this is not something where you have white privilege and you shouldn't, or you didn't do anything necessarily to gain it, and it's not something I'm trying to take from you, but it is something relative to wanting to be able to not have some of the concerns I have to go through and think about certain things, as I navigate life.
Right.
um, One of the ones that was an aha moment for me was when we had the Gurney United rally. And as we were coordinating it with the other pastors and the mayor, at one point you had asked, hey, in the event that something, if someone starts to speak out, we'd be willing to go and say, hey, we're trying to be peaceful and so on and so forth. And I told you, yeah, I'd absolutely I'd be willing to do that. But then, that morning as I was getting ready, because it was a beautiful sunny day, I have these Terminator looking glasses for they're like Oakley type sunshades. And on the way out the door, because I always wear those, on the way out the door, instead of wearing those, I grab my other shades that are kind of nerdy looking, that, the kind that turn dark when it's bright outside. But they give me this professor type look. And my thought process was, again, I'm doing this because I want to be looked at as non-threatening. And I didn't think about it until a few days later when I was watching the Christian Cooper video, the guy from Central Park, the bird watcher, and he was being interviewed, and he wears wireframe glasses. And he said that one of the reasons that he wears wireframe glasses is, and not contacts is because the wireframe glasses make him look less threatening. And so as a result of that, that's why he doesn't wear contacts. So these are kind of the things that you think about, and they seem silly, except that when you start to bring all of the experiences that you've had together, then you do become a little reserved on how you navigate, because you know that there's a perception, or potentially a perception, that you want to dispel because it may cause trouble for you.
Yeah.
So, the hoodies, when the boys are walking around, if they're walking together in public, I'm always telling them to calm down, and they're just laughing and what have you. But again, I don't want someone to just feel or view them as trouble, right? Or anything other than just some kids having a good time.
Yeah.
And one of the things I said was, when I think about all my experiences, I think about the experiences of my friends. These are the things that drive me to process my environment that way. And I've talked with a few friends, because again, you've heard me say several times, I'm not crazy. And the reason why I routinely say that is because it sounds crazy that you're worrying about wire rim glasses versus contacts, because you are not wearing a hoodie because you're going to feel threatened, or feel like a threat rather. But those are the thoughts. And when I think about the experiences that I've had, that drives that. But then I think about, I think it was last week or the week before last, we talked about Spark. And Spark, when his son was, I can't remember if he was 4 years old or somewhere in early childhood, where a friend of his told him that he couldn't play with him anymore. Or what his white friend told, Spark's son is biracial. So Spark's son's friend told him that he couldn't play with him anymore because he was Black, essentially. And so when I hear that, it's like, okay, this is not just something that I'm kind of picking up, or it's just me experiencing this. White people are witnessing the same thing that I'm witnessing. Another example, and Spark's son is an adult now, so you may make the argument, well, that was a long time ago, right? But then Zach on our staff, before he was an IC Kids director, he was a teacher in elementary school. And he, shared with me how bummed he was when a 7-year-old said to him, I wish I could play with the Black kids. And when he asked him why he couldn't, it was because his parents told him that he couldn't. Well, this is just a few years ago. So yeah, you make the argument, Spark's kid's an adult, and this was a long time ago, but now we're talking about, in the last 5 years, this happened. Which again affirms that there are people out here that see me differently, strictly for what I look like and who I, and not for who I am, and will potentially respond to me that way. Another story is from Jo, our worship director. She shared with me that she was at a family event, and her niece is biracial. And at the family event, and this was not long ago, her niece is only, I don't know, 10 or 11, somewhere in that ballpark. And they were at a family event. And it's actually happened on 2 occasions, actually. But they were at a family event, and a couple of family members were using the N-word. And because her niece was present, she asked the family members not to say that. And they actually became belligerent as opposed to saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize." They actually became belligerent about it. And a fight almost ensued with, Joe and her niece's dad and the family members who had said it because they, I guess, didn't see it to be a problem. And again, this is not long ago. So when these people exist, people that are okay with telling, Jarrell Jr. what they thought of him and what they thought of Kids from Zion. And then the last one is a friend who's in my age group. When she was a kid, when she was in fourth grade, to be specific, she said that she had made a friend at school, a black friend at school, and she wanted to invite the black friend over, and her parents told her that they couldn't, or she couldn't invite them over because they were concerned that she might become friends with the little black girl, and the little black girl might have brothers, and if she, got to know the brothers and liked the brothers, that wasn't an option. And so this is what a fourth grader was told, what makes you, I guess, 9. So this is a reality. And I think one of the things to keep in mind is with regard to, like I talked about, the fear is, that same person shared with me a story when they become they become an adult, and over time they developed a fear of black people, essentially based on things that they've heard and things they were told, not out of an actual experience. And so one night she was driving home and got turned around and ended up in a black neighborhood. And I believe she was at a gas station, and a black guy came walking up to her, and he said, "Hey, you look lost. Can I help you?" And she talked about how afraid she was because of this perception that had been created of what black people were like. And he gave her directions, and she was on her way. But then what's even more interesting, on her way trying to get back to the interstate, she actually it was snowing, it was wintertime. She got stuck in the snow, still in the, someone just messaged me. She was in college at the time. So she was on her, after she got the directions from the gas station, she was on her way back to the interstate, and she got stuck in the snow, and she's spinning out, and she's still in the black neighborhood. Another black person walks up to her and says, "Hey, can I give you a hand?" And this person starts to help her to get out of the snow, and they weren't having any success. And so a couple other black guys came and helped, and she finally got, unstuck and made it on the way home. And she talked about how she cried on the way home because this fear was created that she just realized wasn't necessarily true. So when it's those kind of stories that make me know it's true, that me believing that people see me as a potential threat, or a person that might do something inappropriate, that's a reality. And in that reality, I that's the reality that I live in, which is why I do the weird things, like think about where I'm going and what I'm saying and how I say it and who I say it to, and should I wear these shades or should I wear the other shades. So those are some of the things that I guess affirm for me that.
Hey, Jarrell, can I interrupt here for a minute and not mess up your train of thought?
Yes.
I know you've said a couple times in these conversations that you're not crazy. And I can attest to that because we work pretty closely together. You're not crazy. I'm wondering, though, if the emotion that all of these experiences brings out in you is huge stress. I mean, do you have constant stress, or you don't feel that that's part of
I,
who you are?
I think there is stress, but it's not stress that I recognize or identify. I mean, thinking about it in terms of trauma is like a completely new concept to me that was only shared when I was meeting with a friend a few weeks ago who is a trauma expert. And that when they started describing it and kind of made some points, I'm like, that I guess that is what it is. When you have someone who experiences something and as a result of that starts to behave in certain ways and think about things differently. So I guess I would imagine that there is a level of stress because it's things I'm thinking about and concerned about. though again, they don't always consciously come to the forefront of my mind. So I don't feel necessarily the conscious anxiousness, but I'm sure that there's a level of stress having to do that. And it'd be great to not have to think about those kind of things.
You
And
know, this could be really far-fetched because I tend to, go down rabbit trails and think, but I know from reading over the years that Black Americans have a much higher rate of like high blood pressure and diseases like that. It just occurred to me now. I mean, I think it's entirely possible that it's due to some of the experiences over and over and over again in the years and growing up in a Black family and hearing the stories and experiencing the whatever. I just wonder. Obviously, you don't know. You're not a doctor, but I just feel like that could have a factor in physical expressions of stress.
yeah, it definitely seems feasible. And I actually thought the exact same thing, specifically with the high blood pressure, which, Blacks are known to have a higher rate of it. Um,
Right.
so yeah, it's realistic. And the reality is I am doing a lot of extra work to travel and navigate life. So yeah, there is a certain level of stress, though I don't necessarily always feel that level of stress. And,
Right.
and maybe, I, I think maybe I've become comfortable with it, more than anything else. Because if I think about it, I'm saying, hey, Jarrell, when you walk the dog, you need to make sure you're doing this and you don't do this and you don't do that. So there's obviously worry there, but I think it's because it's so normal. I don't recognize it often as worry and stress. So I guess, yeah, there is worry and stress there.
The only time I've ever gotten to walk a mile in your shoes is when I've been in India or Haiti.
Mhm.
In India in particular, I was the only white guy
Mhm.
in for miles and miles and miles, and I'm 6'6" on top of it. So I stuck out like a sore thumb, literally. And I know how stressful the moment we walked out of our host home until the moment we walked back in,
Mhm.
which was 12 hours later, I I was on edge and I could feel my heart beating constantly. And so I just can't imagine that it doesn't take a toll, but you do I suppose if I lived there every day, all day for my life, I would get used to it too. And not used to it like it wouldn't be there anymore. It would just be like normal.
Right.
And you're just constantly operating at another
Yeah.
level of stress.
Yeah, and I think that's it. I think it is a normalcy that you don't realize. And the other thing is when I talk to other Black people, only to realize, and this other part that makes me realize I'm not crazy, is they're having the exact same thoughts and experiences. They're concerned about jogging through their neighborhood. Or I remember one of the pastors, or maybe it was an elder from one of the churches at the Gurney United, shared a story about the delivery man leaving the package on the neighbor's step. The Black family had a package delivered, and it was delivered to the neighbors either across the street or next door. And when they realized that, the thought was, okay, do I really want to go and pick up that package off the porch because someone may think otherwise? And the wife said, well, why don't I go and get it? Because I'm going to be less threatening, and it's less likely for someone to think that something's wrong if they see you going to get a package off the porch. You
Yeah.
know, so
Huh.
Carlos Whitaker, who's a writer and worship pastor, um, he's black guy, and he talks about going down the street kicking a soccer ball with his son. The whole family was walking, and the ball went up in somebody's yard, and he just kind of reflexively went to get it, and his wife grabbed his arm and said, "Let the kids get it,
mhm.
not you." And it was that thing of like, if somebody looks out, the
It's
black guy.
always there. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting.
Jarrell, we didn't talking about this, but I think it would be helpful, and it's stuff that I think you and I have laughed about it a lot. Um, I think one of the misconceptions from a lot of white people is that what the Black community wants is for there to be color blindness. And you've said to me several times, like, no, we're different. And it's okay that we're different. I just don't want to have to, live my life stress filled and all those kinds of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And like, one, can you elaborate on that? And then I want to, we don't have to name the other staff person's name, but I want to talk about in the TV show about washcloth. And just like that was one of those differences where you and I were talking about it. I'm like, so like, just speak on the idea first, and then we can maybe share a couple examples. I don't know.
Yeah, I think to me, when you say you're colorblind, and I know the intention often, but when you say you're colorblind, what you tell me is you don't see me, right? Because the reality is that there are differences, right? Not always, but culturally, generally speaking, there are differences, whether it be music or styles of clothes or humor. There are distinct differences. And so it's not colorblind. It's that I treat you equally. So I don't want you to be colorblind. I want you to see me. I want you to see me as different, but I also want you to see me as equal and not a threat. So that would be my general thoughts with regard to colorblind when we say that.
Yeah.
Because I mean,
and it applies to me a whole group of people, whereas I would like to interact with you as an individual. Is that kind of you're Jarrell and you're who you are. You're not just one of a big mass of people who are nothing to me.
Yeah, I mean, and ethnicities are different, and that's okay. People. I hear people say all the time, "Well, it's the Irish in me, or it's the German in me, or it's the this, or it's the that," and that's great. It's when you see one of those things as somehow less than, or not okay, or things of that nature that becomes a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
So we had this washcloth example, but we had also shared a video about a cookout, and I had that experience because I think this is helpful for people to like go, okay, there are differences, and I don't know, maybe the washcloth example, some people will be like, that's not different for me. I don't know.
Yeah, well, yeah, because there were some people on staff. They were like, "Well, I use one," But again, there are general cultural differences. They don't always apply to everybody, but there are differences, and so we were watching the Neighborhood, which is a new series on, I don't know, ABC or something, with Cedric the Entertainer, and he lives in a Black neighborhood, and this white family moves in next door to him, and it's all about how they're kind of coming together and figuring out differences and what have you. And it's not always race related, but in this one particular episode, the white family had a plumbing problem, and so when the water wasn't working in their house, the Black family said, "Well, you can come over to the wife. You can come over and use our shower." And so the Black wife brought her up into the room and showed her where the shower was, and she handed her a washcloth. And the white wife was like, "What is this for?" And the Black wife was like, "It's a washcloth. You wash with it." And so the next day, because a few of us watched the show, we were in the office and we were all laughing about it because I was like, "Yeah, you use a washcloth." And, a lot of you were like, "Well, no, we don't use washcloths." And, even in the actual TV show, when the white wife had said that she doesn't use a washcloth, she just kind of uses the soap, the Black wife like, "That's nasty," And but again, and this is one of those things where it's different, it's not wrong, but it was still funny because that's that reaction and what have you. And I remember us talking about it, and then did you start using one, or I can't remember how it went from there.
Oh, I tried one. Yeah, you're infinitely more cleaner. I felt cleaner. I like never in my life had I ever used a washcloth before in the shower. I mean, truth be told, I've always wondered what they were for.
Okay, this is blows my mind. Okay, because I was part of that watch that conversation. I use washcloths all the time. I mean, that's
Really?
part of, yes.
Yeah,
So
I don't know.
I don't know. That's
Yeah.
It's so interesting, right? Like,
it might not be as
what's
culturally
weird is,
different as
like, here's what's weird. If Diane and I we were talking about that, and there was, that difference, we wouldn't really think twice about it. But isn't it interesting how when a black guy and a white guy have that, now it's like this difference that you talk about.
Yeah. It's just like our families did something different. It was a different custom or a different way of doing things. It had nothing to do with color, but
yeah, I think as I'm thinking about this particular conversation about washcloths, I think this is the key: is that we're more alike than we're different.
It's so true,
right? And I think that's part of the problem. Is it seems like, okay, it's a black thing, but Diane's like, well, I use a washcloth, and someone else in the office said the same thing, and also thought the rest of you who didn't was nasty also, and I was a white person. We're more alike than we're different, and the problem is that we constantly focus on differences, and we use that to drive a wedge. And the reality is that from that video from last week is that differences and ignorance, right, not knowing, produces fear. And I think that's kind of the reality.
Yeah. And it can be celebrated. Like, I think every time, all we got to do is say washcloth to each other and we laugh.
Right.
Like, it becomes something that you're like, yeah, we are different about that, and I kind of like that,
Yeah.
Or like talking about cookouts.
Right.
Like, a cookout with your family is going to look probably different than mine.
Yeah.
But the truth is, yours are a lot more fun.
Yeah. It just kind of depends, I mean, there's, and that I think that's why it's so important to look at the things in common. And like someone mentioned it, I don't remember who it was, but they talked about a funeral, right? And oftentimes a black funeral and a white funeral, they kind of tend to be really different, right, with level of emotion and so on and so forth. And both families are devastated, right, and they're sorrowful. They just express it differently, and neither one of them are right or wrong, right? It's just that they're different again. But the commonality is they're both experiencing loss, right? And they both can connect on, I know what it feels like to lose a loved one,
Right.
Yeah, it's so true. Oh, Diane, I thought you were going to start saying something.
Not this time.
I didn't want to interrupt you.
One of the things that I want to talk about is trying as best I can give you a glimpse of what it might feel like to be me and process things the way I process things. And again, this is not a perfect analogy. So at some level, it's going to fall apart. So don't overanalyze it, but take it as an attempt to help you understand. And what I mean by that is that most of the people on this call are probably Christians. I mean, this is a conversation by people that all work at a church. And so my assumption is that at least some of you have had some experiences that are similar. And what I mean by that is, have you ever been in a situation, or maybe you met someone for the first time, or you walked into a new environment and you didn't want to lead with, I'm a Christian? And you didn't want to lead with that because, though it's not true, Christians can have a reputation of being self-righteous and know-it-alls and party poopers and no fun and all these other things, right? And we know them to not be true. And it's not about being ashamed of being a Christian, but you may not want to lead with that, depending on where you go. Mm-hmm. Because you know that the moment that they hear that, they may respond to you differently. All of a sudden, someone may say, well, I can't say that around them, or, oh, the Christian's in the room, I can't tell this joke, or whatever those things may be, right? So imagine being a Christian when you are in those kind of situations and Christians tattooed across your forehead. So that you can't, and it's not that you don't tell anybody. So I'm not suggesting that you don't tell them, but you don't lead with that because you want them to realize, okay, you probably have some poor assumptions. So I don't want to lead with that. I'm going to let you know. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. I will never forget. I was at it's like a family get together thing. And there were some, what do you call that? Distant family members. So
Short tail relatives.
Perfect. Were there that I had never met. Not from my family. They were from my wife's side of the family. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting next to this woman on a couch and we had started up, small talk. And she asked me what I did for a living, which, you ask any pastor, that's like the worst question that you can, is exactly what we're talking about. And I said, well, I'm actually the pastor of a church. She moved over a cushion. She literally was like, oh, that's nice. And then like intentionally, and maybe subconsciously, I don't know, but moved over because I made her uncomfortable with, just who I was. And I think, like you said, I was kind of cornered into having to let that cat out of the bag there. What you're talking about is not having a choice. Like if I had pastor tattooed to my forehead every room I walked into.
If I could just give a real quick addition to that. Some of you know Joe Borman, who was our pastor for 26 years. When Joe was asked that question, and this happened several times in my presence, he would say, I'm the CEO of a nonprofit organization, often. For the very same reason, because he said pastor just shuts it down. So you might want to remember that.
But I think that's such a great analogy, Jarrell, honestly. And I don't, the only breakdown is that you do get a choice as to whether or not you say anything about it. But, I think there's a reason why you'll notice a lot of Christians kind of pray under their breath at a restaurant, right? Or they may choose in a restaurant, I'm not going to pray because they don't want to make other people uncomfortable, or they don't want to be uncomfortable, or it's this grid that you're running everything through. That we don't even realize we're running that through half the time.
Yeah. So yeah, and that's it, and that's the closest I can give you as an example. Is imagine if everywhere you went that was the case, and now you knew that people were going to look at you differently without ever having talked with you, make assumptions about you, whether they're good or bad, make assumptions nonetheless, simply because you've identified yourself with a particular group. And then again, imagine not being able to choose how you work that into the conversation and at what point you work it into the conversation. Yeah. I think another thing to think about, along the same lines is, when we talk about racism and we talk about the powers that be and, things like that, I think when we think about it, using that same analogy, maybe it's not as far-fetched, because rightfully so, many of us believe that the church is under attack, right? We believe that our liberties have been taken away, our freedom of expression has been taken away, and we're limited, and they're removing, Christianity and God and Jesus, from all walks of life. And I'm not saying that that's not true. But I could also then say, but is that really the case? Because, well, we get to do church online to the entire world, right? And, they've made it, even in COVID, we have a special exception to have more people meet at our church than everyone else, and I could go on and on about all the things that we do get to do, which might make it sound like, okay, well, you guys aren't making any sense. There's no real problem here. You get to do this, you get to do that. So what do you mean there's someone that's out to get you, whether it's individuals or whether it's a collective unit? That's the general belief, that the church is under attack, even though, again, we can speak to all the things that are happening. And it's kind of the same thing when I say, okay, You know, there are racist systems. There are people, you know, who don't want us to succeed, who have issues with us. And that's evident by the stories I've told about my personal experiences and the stories I've told of friends who've had these experiences. So it's not like these people don't exist and this is all made up. And I guess I ask if it's conceivable that there could be a group of people that are not identifying themselves overtly but are against the church, then why would it be inconceivable that there's a group of people who may not be identifying themselves that are against Black people?
Right.
So again, something to think about.
Well, what's terrifying is there are people who do overtly go out against Black people, right? Like,
Yes, as well as Christians, right?
Right.
yeah,
Right. Yeah.
I think that's, you know, for me, that's such an eye-opening thing, because it just helps you go, oh my gosh. And what's funny is nobody has ever said to me or anybody that brings up the whole, you know, the church is being oppressed or whatever. Nobody ever pushes back and says, well, look at all this that you have gotten, right? Like, we don't check it that way. But when it comes to race, it's like a knee-jerk reaction, like, and I think that comes from, we just want to remove the burden from our own shoulders. Like, ugh, if I own up to that, then there's some indicative there, indication on me as a
Yeah.
person, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great analogy, you know, to just kind of think through. And yeah, I have a similar situation in a group of friends that I have. It's hard to describe, but it was a long time before I let on kind of my political leanings, you know, conservative versus not conservative. And there was a lot of surprise and, you know, whoa. But I never felt comfortable for a long time. And so I really identify, you know, with that analogy. You know, and then there's, you know, sometimes being called the church lady, that's really fun too. Or, you know, a bad word and say, oh, sorry, Diane's here. Well, you know, I've heard the words before, you know, but it really gives me pause for thought, Jarrell. Yeah. Yeah. It's home. Yeah.
Oh shoot, I was gonna ask you something and now I can't remember what it was, Jarrell. I can't remember what it was.
Someone chatted the question, but
Yeah, I'm just seeing it now.
yeah, can you elaborate a little bit on the question to make sure that we can answer it? I want to make sure I understand the context.
Well, we'll wait to see what she says. She commented on that analogy, so.
All right.
I was gonna ask you about, you know, in high school, Jarrell, when you, because you went to a private school, we've talked about that, right? And so and tell me if I'm wrong on this, you had your like school friends and a lot of them were white, and then you had your neighborhood friends, right, that were mostly Black.
No, so I started out in a poor Black neighborhood, and so the private school that I went to was a Black private school. So essentially, yeah. So I grew up in a poor Black neighborhood, and so I had all those friends that I, you know, knew all from, you know, from kindergarten through high school, in part because even though I didn't stay in that neighborhood my entire life, after school every day I'd go to my grandmother's house who lived in that neighborhood. And so I'd hang out with them after school, you know, or I'd hang out with them on the weekend when we visit my grandma. So that was my connection to that the Black neighborhood after we moved away. And then we moved into a white neighborhood. So essentially, I was kind of doing both. From 3 to 5, for example, I would be at my grandma's house until my mom and dad got off work, hanging out with my friends. And then from 5 to 7, I'd be outside hanging out with my white friends in my white neighborhood. So I kind of spent time in both. But the high school that I went to was an all male Black private high school.
Okay. Because I was going to ask you if you ever felt pressure or stress or um, I don't know, like torn between those two communities. Did you feel pressure from one against the other? Because you
Yeah.
like lived in that middle area right there. I mean, talk about messy middle.
Right. Well, I didn't feel torn at all. But what I did realize was both sides were wrong about the other side.
Wow.
There were some things that were right. There were a lot of things that were wrong. You know, I had great friends in both neighborhoods. I also had friends that weren't so great in both neighborhoods who did mean and nasty and ugly things. So I think that's probably my biggest takeaway from being able to kind of spend half and half of my life, you know, in two different neighborhoods, was to realize, okay, part of it, and it goes back to friendship, right? The problem is that you guys are not you guys over here and you guys over here, you're not friends, and so you're not talking to each other, so you're not seeing how much you actually have in common. So that's been more of my experience. And you know, when I hear, especially when I was in high school, and I'd hear my Black friends say things about white people, I'd hear my white friends say things about Black people. My thought was, you're both missing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I'm asking that because in high school, when I was on the basketball team, I was only one of two white guys on the team. And yet most of the people that I hung out with outside of school were white kids. And I would have that similar experience where you'd hear things from each side where you're like, well, that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say for me, I sometimes felt that like you got to kind of choose
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing. You don't get to play both sides here. And I remember being real frustrated with that.
Yeah. Well, what you're describing, which was a component, um, was that sometimes I was too white for my Black friends and too Black for my white friends.
Mm.
And so that was, and I was having a conversation with another friend who talked about his wife is, I believe, she's Mexican, and I think she has said the same thing to him. But that is something that I've experienced, right? So, like, for example, literally my life, loved BET, loved MTV as a high schooler, right? Loved rock and roll, loved rap music. So, that was, so then when I'm saying, hey, did you guys hear the new Def Leppard? They're like, what are you talking about? Or on the other side, I'm saying something different. So there is that component, but it wasn't so much a choosing as much as it was like, I'm not sure if you get it or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've always, and I don't know, part of it may have been, it was more athletes and not athletes, that might have been more of the divide, but
yeah.
I do remember feeling frustrated that it seemed there was, at least on my end, a perceived choice that had to be made, that the two were never really gonna mix. It was like these two separate worlds kind of thing. And back then, I think I was just too insecure and scared to even have thoughts about what would it look like to try and pull these worlds together, where there would be a broader circle of friendship. I don't know. But that, what you said, I'm not Black enough for my Black friends or white enough for my white friends. My best friend in the world is biracial, and he struggles with that a lot because he's pretty dark skinned, so he does not look biracial at all. And but he's said things like that to me before, what you said, in the circles that he runs with. And I think that's a unique and difficult place to be. Feel that kind of pressure.
Yeah,
for sure.
I'm interested too in the fact that I just learned that Jarrell, you went to an all male high school. I mean, that has to have shaped a lot of your adult life as well.
Absolutely. It was one of the best experiences. it was life changing and one of the best experiences ever.
Yeah.
Of going
Yeah.
to going to that school.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I think it was up to your wife to like civilize you after that or something. I don't know. If you didn't if you didn't grow up with you didn't have sisters, did you?
I was a sister 6 years younger.
Well, yeah, young, a lot younger. But hanging around with all those guys,
Hmm.
had to have left a mark.
Oh, without a doubt, without a doubt.
So funny. Yeah. Well, we've got about 9 minutes left, and I think I just want to come back to kind of what spurred this all on for us. I mean, really, what spurred on everything, including our friendship. I mean, we crossed paths because we work at a church together,
Mhm.
and just I think that for me, constantly having to remind myself and remind people that I'm part of Christianity with, is that this is what we've been talking about and I don't know, dreaming about together and living is really a Christian principle, and that this shouldn't be something we leave up to some political party, either anyone you follow, right? It's not up to them to fix. It shouldn't be up to celebrities to fix. That if we really believe what we say we believe about God and that He made everyone, um, that means He has equal value that He puts in everyone. And at some point, I feel like this song became it not politically correct, but I remember when I was a kid singing, Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world, red, yellow, black, and white. They are precious in His sight.
Mhm.
And I don't know, somewhere along the line, I don't know where it happens, but we compartmentalize that song and we think of it as like this almost like fairy tale kind of lyric that we used to sing, instead of actually really believing it. That it always goes back to God being our Heavenly Father and us being His children. And I look at my kids, and I have 4 sons, and I know, Diane, you would say the same about your 2, and Jarrell, you with your 3. None of them are alike. I don't have 2 kids that are the same.
Yeah.
I mean, they are totally different,
Yeah.
and they are each equally precious to me. And some of what makes them different is what makes them precious to me.
Mhm.
And I think that we have to always come back to that as followers of Jesus, to help us remember that in the eyes of our Heavenly Father, we're all precious. And if you're precious in His sight, that means you're precious in my sight. And if you're precious to me, then I'm not only nodding along when this topic comes up, but I'm actively seeking for things to be better for you, right? I'm actively speaking up and doing things and giving of my time, talent, energies, and even finances for change in this, so that you would know, and they would know, and everybody would know that they are precious in the eyes of God. Because I think that sometimes, without realizing it, um, we have, and by we I mean Christians, and I don't mean that every Christian is racist. That's not what I'm saying. But we have inadvertently communicated that on this topic, it's not precious enough for us to actually do something about it. And for me, it goes back to Revelation 7:9. This is kind of where I teed off that message a few weeks back. And for me, I'm big on vision. I'm a leader. So, we talk a lot about what do we want to be true in the future. And when you can identify and paint a picture of what we want to be true in the future, well, that informs every action we take now in the meantime. So just thinking about it in terms, and I know I'm not telling the two of you anything. This is just more for the benefit of everybody that's joined us. As a church, our vision for the future is all our neighbors, all our region, all for Jesus. That's like, and you know, that sounds outlandish to a lot of people, right? Like that's a lot of people. But if we could imagine our ideal future and like get to the end of our life and go, I feel like I did something with my life, that's what it would be. And for me, when God says in Revelation 7:9, I should have pulled it up, looked it up before I got on this call, but I didn't. So we'll see how good my sword drill skills are. Revelation.
Very end of the Bible there, Josh.
Oh, is that?
Yeah.
I'm glad you're here to help me. For me, Jesus paints the picture. God's painting his vision for the future. Oh, sorry, and going back to the church thing, if all our neighbors, all our region, all for Jesus is our vision, then everything we do today and tomorrow and the next day and the next day should be designed to help us get closer to that. So for me, as a Christian, when I see God paint this picture, it means that everything I do today, tomorrow, and the day after that should point towards that. And it says after this, so John is the one that wrote down everything in Revelation, and God gives him this vision of the future. And he says, after this, I saw a vast crowd, too great to count. Now pause there for a minute. We have counted all the people on earth, and there's 7 billion something, right? There's a crowd of people in this scene that you can't count. There's too many to count. To me, it's like, let's go down to the beach and start counting grains of sand. That's unrealistic, right? And so John says, there's a crowd here. There's just so many people you can't even count them. And here's who makes up the crowd. Every nation, every tribe, every people, every language, which to me is like every language spoken on earth is represented here, right? Like, I'll be honest, I'll shoot straight with the two of you, and you know, I guess I have to with everybody that's listening. Honestly, I believe for most of my life that in heaven it'd be English, because that's how I grew up, right? Like when you grow up in Midwest America, you just assume everybody should speak English, and you start thinking, well, when we get to heaven. And then somebody told me once, Jesus never spoke English a day of his life. That messed with me. Jesus never spoke a word of English in a day of his life.
That's crazy.
And then they reminded me, like, his skin color was probably closer to Jarrell's than it was to mine. Like we get this idealized picture. And they're all standing in front of the throne and before the Lamb, before Jesus. They're clothed in white robes, held palm branches in their hands, and they were shouting with a great roar, salvation comes from our God. And to me, that is the key word, our. No one gets to claim singular possession of him. No one gets to claim possession of him at all. But the roar says, our God, who sits on the throne and is from the Lamb. And so to me, if that's God's vision for the future, then what we're doing here is trying to take a step towards that, right? When I preach on this topic on a Sunday, it's us trying to take a step toward that. When we take purposed steps to be a multicultural church, where everybody is not only welcomed, but represented in leadership and given those same opportunities, to me, that's us saying God's vision for the future is our vision for the future. Mm-hmm. And I always go back to, when Jesus taught us to pray, part of that prayer that he prayed was, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so to me, what the church is it's a miniature heaven. It should be, at least. It should be this chance for us to practice what ultimately will be. And, you know, one of the statements I said that Sunday that I know rubbed a few people the wrong way, so I'm just going to say it again. If diversity makes you uncomfortable, and this conversation has made you uncomfortable, heaven is going to be uncomfortable, because white people will probably be the minority there, for sure. So anyway, the reason I wanted to end there was just to bring us back constantly. I feel like that's my job, to always bring us back to, and I know this is your heart, Jarrell, and your heart, Diane, is the reason we're doing this is not just because it's, you know, the hot topic right now. It's not just because we want to like save face and look good. It's because we believe this is a expressed and actual Christian value and pursuit. So
Yeah.
For what it's worth.
Love that vision, Josh.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited to continue to lean into it. We're going to do this one more week, the three of us.
One more.
And next week, just to give a little plug about what we're going to do, we're going to talk just kind of practically about what does this look like going forward. And so, you know, we'll hear from Jarrell a little bit about like, hey, I'm a white guy, and what does it look like for me to not just be non-racist, but anti-racist? And what does it look like for us together, right? And just talk through, because I think that's the number one question I get, and Jarrell, I'm sure you get too, is like, well, what do we do? Like, what do we actually do beyond talking? So we're going to spend some time brainstorming that and kind of just dreaming together what could be, And so I hope you all come back for that. I do want to say thanks, Diane and Jarrell, for being on this call with me, and Jarrell, as always, being so vulnerable and honest, and saying some things that we've all needed to hear, and took real courage for you to share. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And to everybody that's watching, either here on Zoom or on Facebook or later on YouTube or wherever else we post these, thanks so much for taking a couple minutes to watch with us. We hope they're helpful and eye-opening for you. And we'll look forward to seeing you same time and place next Monday, 7 o'clock. Bye, everybody.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.